Hello there, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. In one of our last episodes, we took a look at the Jedi Vector. And one of our Sith viewers, Darth Vagas, pulled a quote from Pablo Hidalgo out of all people. He's one of the more prominent Jedi propagandists at Lucasfilm. And this is a really interesting quote because he talks about how they came up with the design aesthetics for the High Republic period. Taken as a whole, the prequels tracked the march from handcrafted artisan technology to machine-stamped assembly line tech. So given we were dialing the clock to before Episode 1, there was a lot of design explorations that had delicate streamlined feel that felt relevant. Even heading into Episode 3, there were Clone Wars designs that had a foot in the past and a foot in the future. And from there, we found a great contender for the Jedi Vector. It looks very insectile, slim, and delicate, but with a definite sting. So what I want to focus on here is the fact that the prequels track the march from artisanal craftsmanship to like machine stamped mass production. Because we definitely talk a lot about the economics of the late Republic and Galactic Empire on this channel. We talk about consolidation, we talk about nationalization, and the massive amounts of debt the Sith Grand Plan accumulated. We talk about the larger macro picture of how the Empire essentially destroyed the economic value of the entire galaxy, but rarely do we really take a look at the less tangible things that are also lost in these types of environments. Things like the heart and soul of a nation, of a galaxy. Things that often can't be measured in simple economic terms like GDP growth and unemployment rates. What do we lose when we go from an economy that is based around small businesses, artisanal craftsmanship, and transition to one that is more consolidated and focused on mass production and assembly lines? Well, let's take a look at what things were like during the High Republic, widely regarded as the golden age for the galaxy and the Jedi Order. The Jedi of this period are strictly peacekeepers. They flew highly customized vector starships that look more like a work of art than a military machine. The designer and manufacturer of the Vector is Valkyrie Enterprise, and this is a relatively small company. They are boutique. This is very different from when the Jedi Order was essentially conscripted into the Grand Army of the Republic and given mass-produced starfighters. The Valkyrie Enterprise contract is interesting because, as mentioned in previous videos, the Vector at the time was unlike any other starship sold for consumers or for the defense industry. It was completely bare bones, and it was pretty much impossible to fly unless you were a Jedi. Generally speaking, these kind of specialized contracts are not the bread and butter of large defense contractors. Most large ship designers have massive boards of directors, shareholders, all wrapped up in internal politics and bureaucracy and that ever-present demand to make more money and grow. Companies like these make bids for projects they know they can win and have minimal downside risks. They prefer large government contracts that lead to political favor and more opportunities in the future. What they dislike are these random one-off specialist contracts like the Vector. The Vector, from an engineering and design perspective, kind of breaks all the rules. And in many ways, the Jedi are nightmare clients because they don't want something standard or out of the box. And the Jedi Vector that they designed is just completely weird. It doesn't have many basic components like targeting computer sensors and compensators. These are components that have traditionally fed the many vendors and suppliers that large defense contractors have long-term relationships with. In the late Republic period, when the Senate approved production for the ARC 170, it was probably done with a lot of approval and negotiation with lobbyists. The ARC 170's final design made it into production because the Techno Union gets to supply the targeting computer, and the Corporate Alliance, they get to manufacture the sensor array, and so on. Corporatism means that every large member of the oligopoly gets a piece of the action. The Jedi Vector, in contrast, is economically offensive because it's so bare bones. It doesn't feed the beast that is industrial demand. And the only way the Jedi can fly this thing again is using the Force, and that is not something that these large shipbuilders really understand. And that requires more training, study, and R&D than it's worth for such a small project of just a few hundred, maybe a few thousand ships. And even then, the many advances in technology that the Jedi Vector did incorporate were kind of a dead end for mainstream starship production. The Jedi Vector actually represents a divergence from the main tech tree, and any further technological developments for these type of starships will only be used by a small population of Jedi. There's just not a big market for this. I mean, how many more times do I have to explain to you that the economics for this starship doesn't make sense? But for the kid inside of all of us, especially those who dreamed of a career in industrial design or just enjoyed playing with Legos growing up, is there a cooler job than designing a starship for the Jedi? This is what Valkyrie Enterprise represents. Not all businesses during this period of time were chasing solely profits. Some of these companies were still pursuing passion and creativity, innovation. And from the point of view of someone living in the late Republic period during the Clone Wars or during the Imperial period, it all seems kind of silly. The High Republic does. You have these super fragile and highly specialized starships flown by peacekeepers who do almost anything they can to restrain their power and lethality. I mean, you have to insert a lightsaber into the dashboard of a Vector in order to even activate the weapons. An extra step that on the battlefields of the Clone Wars or the Galactic Civil War would have been considered dangerous and deadly to the pilots. But then again, during the High Republic, we weren't worried about how lethal or deadly our peacekeepers could be. It was more about accountability. And that is what the Golden Age was. It's a period of great optimism, driven by peace and stability. It's a period that we should strive for as a society. Whereas the post-Clone Wars period is driven by cynicism. That was created in the horrors of a Sith-made galaxy-wide conflict. That was never inevitable. The Sith couldn't force a democracy to bend its knee, but they could manipulate public perception and use the very tools of the Republic to destroy itself. They wanted people to be afraid of each other, to not trust each other, to give up on this grand experiment of democracy. What the High Republic had was truly remarkable. There was widespread trust in the Republic, in the institutions. People also trusted each other more. The Jedi were given huge amounts of power and responsibility, and this is why they took such extreme measures to restrain themselves, so that they didn't abuse that trust. Why were people more trusting of each other? Well, it wasn't just peace and stability. It was also the ideology of the Republic that placed a lot more value on the individual. The High Republic period was far less industrialized and featured a far more diverse and segmented galactic economy. This is years before the Free Trade Zone was created in the Outer Rim, which, essentially shifted all manufacturing to the Outer Rim and also severely disrupted the labor markets. One can compare this single event to the United States gradually outsourcing much of its lower margin industries to cheaper markets in developing nations. We used to be a country where small businesses employ the majority of the people in the country. We used to be a country where Main Street was where most people did their businesses and shopping. A guy could graduate high school, find a job in town, and then work inside the community and continue to keep that money and value in the community. And then poof, one day you woke up and everything changed. This is essentially what happened to the people in the Star Wars galaxy after the Free Trade Zone was established. People from the core regions of the galaxy lost their jobs. I mean, Han Solo's father, before he was a drunk, worked at a Corellian Engineering Corporation factory building the YT series. And he was proud of that job. It was a good paying job, and it gave a man a sense of pride and a sense of control over their own life. And that is so important, we're starting to understand now. But as CEC started facing more pressure from competitors, as more labor was shifted to the Outer Rim away from Corellia, Han's father worked harder and harder until he too was let go, and then he kind of devolved. He became a shadow of himself. He became an alcoholic, and he left Han behind as a result. A lot of immoral political leaders will take advantage of that anger that, Han Solo's father felt, and he'll try to distract them by, pointing fingers at the people in the Outer Rim. In our own country, we see this happen time and time again. Blame the Chinese textile workers, blame the Mexican auto workers, blame the Irish IT workers. They're the ones who are responsible for taking your jobs. The truth is, factory workers, laborers everywhere have a lot more in common with each other than they do with the executive class in their own countries that turn people into numbers. All the problems we face in America has nothing to do with foreign countries. It was all these Americans selling out Americans. Corporate execs, corporate boards focus more on margins than the workers they've employed for so many years. And, in their defense, there's also a lot of pressure kind of placed on them as well, right? It's an entire system. In the United States, the American worker became too expensive, just like how the workers in the core regions of the galaxy became too expensive. In America, we became too prosperous as a nation. It used to be you needed just one income to take care of your family. But when two people worked, well, you increase the amount of wealth of a household usually by two. And that raises the income level of the family, which allows them to bid for more expensive houses. It allows them to afford much more luxurious cars. And the people who don't follow suit, well, they kind of get left behind. And so more and more people were forced to go into labor markets to buy things that we label as the American dream. But maybe a lot of this consumption was never necessary. The real difference between the 1950s and today is not, demographics or moral values or belief systems. It's actually how much Americans consume. We went from a manufacturing heavy labor market to a service driven one for a reason. I mean, all Americans faced massive lifestyle creep in the last 50, 60 years. I mean, look at the average tech or finance worker today. All right, they make good money, but they can't raise their kids, so they have a nanny or a daycare to do that for them. They don't have time to clean their houses, they have a maid. They don't have time to cook, so they dine out, or if they don't have time to drive, they hire an Uber to bring it to their doors. We have all of these service jobs just built around one high-paid individual, one high-value individual. And, to be honest, I know a lot of people that I know work in these industries, and a lot of them aren't happy. They're overworked, they're stressed, they don't spend enough time with their families, and a lot of them are also living paycheck to paycheck because that lifestyle creep, that lifestyle they get used to because they have to work so hard, well, it becomes kind of unsustainable if they lose their job. Everyone's kind of trapped in this. We've all gotten used to this lifestyle, this growth at all cost mentality, and it's reached a point where it has overwhelmed almost every other economic model on the planet. I mean, China right now is struggling to switch from a manufacturing economy to a service-oriented economy as we speak. And I think there's a reason why, a country like Japan has become such a focal point in the minds of Western audiences in the last few years. And that's because when you visit Japan, you're essentially visiting a nation that has been in a state of stagnation since the early 90s. I mean, a lot of that country still operate on Windows 95 and fax machines. And I guess there's something comforting about slower growth, especially in the crazy kind of world we live in, right? In a lot of ways, Japan is our world's high republic. It's a place that still clings to beauty, thoughtful traditions that by our imperial standards of efficiency seem antiquated and foolish. I don't need a toilet that welcomes me with a beautiful chime and a hello, and then sprays flowery fragrance to cover the smell of my farts, plays sounds to hide the violent splashes of my turds, an automatic bidet system that makes me finally realize how barbaric and terrible toilet paper is. Not just for the environment, but for my butthole. Japan's full of awesome and weird stuff like this. Take their rice farming industry. Economically, it makes no sense. Their rice costs 3 to 5 times more to grow than it does in a South Asian country like Laos, for instance. And that is because Japan is a densely populated mountainous nation with very little land. For an advanced economy to use that limited space for low-value agriculture protected by massive tariffs and subsidies is really stupid on a spreadsheet. I've even heard claims that the Japanese stomach can only consume Japanese rice because it's sensitive, but of course that is just bullshit. But it's bullshit in the service to a cultural shield that is rice farming. It is used to protect the identity of their nation, their rural farming communities. It also addresses their food security needs. It's an artisanal choice in a machine-stamped world, and, in my opinion, they are failing as a society. It is not easy for the average Japanese worker right now. Their wages are severely depressed. The country's going through a depopulation crisis, and it sucks to see this model failing as well. The zero growth model has left Japan in a pretty bad crisis. And now there is pressure to scale up, embrace the kind of machine-stamped worldview. Quick, rapid, unsustainable growth. Japan is becoming to embrace a more American-style growth model despite having a debt-to-GDP ratio that would make a banking clan accountant faint. We even see it in their leadership. Prime Minister Takeishi recently quoted Eren Yeager's famous "shut up and bet everything on me" line from Attack on Titans. If you don't know the show, well, Eren Yeager says that line to the military leadership and politicians of his nation. He promises to use his Titan powers to save humanity, but Eren's solution to protecting his nation's artisan soul was to embrace a global genocide that wiped out 80% of humanity. It's 2026 and Japan's starting to talk crazy and Germany is rearming itself. What a great time to be alive. Now, to be clear, there's not one person we can blame for this machine and this embrace of the machine-stamped future, right? It really is just a product of imbalance and a lack of restraint from all of us. And we're all a part of the problem. Even though I live in a tiny apartment, I keep my footprint small. Compared to my father's generation, I'm very wasteful. And because new generations want more toys for their kids, more clothing for special occasions and our corporate-backed holidays, well, you had to cheapen the quality of products, find new markets to lower costs. It used to be Chinese textile workers, but now China, believe it or not, has the same problem as America does. They don't have people that actually want to work in their factories. And so they have these dark factories that are completely automated. We're heading from the outer rim corporate exploitation model to the completely consolidated imperial model where slaves and droids do all the work in mega factories. Now, I'm not a hippie. I'm not a Luddite. I'm not a communist. I believe it or not, I make a lot of my money investing and doing research in the markets. And ironically, as I've become more knowledgeable about how our world works, how the capital markets work, I am just filled with more disgust and rage about how stupid everything is, how short-sighted all the decisions our so-called world leaders are making. This is also why I hate the partisan bickering I see outside, all the culture wars. It's a distraction from the real problem, and this is the real problem. The reality is both sides are complicit in the destruction of how we value the individual by valuing money above everything else. And this is the exact type of environment that took the Republic out of the Golden Age and into the late Republic stage. I mean, look at the starfighters of the Clone Wars period. Yes, we had big players like KDY, but we also had smaller companies like Slane and Corporal with its unique V-19 Torrent interceptor. There was also Incom with its legendary ARC 170. Heck, back then, Republic Senior Systems was a boutique ship designer that made ridiculous over-the-top luxury vehicles and researched state-of-the-art military tech. Palpatine saw all of that innovation and diversity and saw inefficiency. Some of the engineers and designers at these smaller starship manufacturers saw the writing on the wall. I mean, most of Incom's design team, an engineering team, defected to the rebellion. That's why the X-Wing became a rebel starfighter. But most companies were just absorbed. Palpatine, in his pursuit of the cheapest, most mass-produced starship, invented the TIE Fighter line. Its engines were so efficient that it doesn't even have moving parts. In theory, it reduced the amount of mechanics and technicians the Imperial Navy needed. And I don't think people like Palpatine do this just to save money. I think they literally want to get rid of people. They see people as something that they can't control, that they can't predict. And it's like a certain type of personality that is very obsessed with control that acts like this. And unfortunately, a lot of these type of people end up in positions of power in major tech companies for some reason. And the result is the TIE Fighter, a ship that was a hollow shell with no soul. It lacked shields and heavy armor, and didn't even have life support because at this point the average Imperial was just cannon fodder. There wasn't even a hyperdrive because why give someone so unimportant the freedom to choose which system they can fly to? And that is the end of the march towards progress, right? The TIE Fighter isn't just a ship, it's literally a tomb. It represents the final victory of the machine stamp philosophy. And the ironic thing was, the machine stamp philosophy was all about promising efficiency, cheaper items for the consumer. But what happens when you destroy the consumer class? What happens when you crush and destroy the human spirit and regurgitate it out as just a simple cog in the machine? Maybe we can't get back to the High Republic version of the world. Maybe our debt is too big. Maybe we scaled up things far too much. I mean, if we don't continue to grow, someone else will. But as we move further into this AI-driven, consolidated future, we should at least have the honesty to admit what we're trading away. Because once you trade your soul for efficiency, you can't really buy it back. Now, I want to end this video with more of a contrarian viewpoint of what I've just talked about, because let's be honest, this is depressing, and I want to be a little bit more neutral. And so I want to talk about how my father sees a lot of this, because it's quite different from a millennial American born in the 90s. He's Chinese. He was born in China in the 1960s, in the middle of chaos, culture revolution, food shortages, all sorts of horrific things. And yes, you could have called China back then an artisanal craftsman style economy. Like many people from Soviet or communist countries, when he came to America, he was overwhelmed by the wealth and richness in this country. When he was growing up, most diseases weren't caused by overeating, but by malnutrition, which took a horrible toll, especially on children and babies. For a period of time, even when his family could afford to buy a piece of meat, they had to have ration tickets first in order to even purchase it. He has a much longer view on history, and he has a much more positive view on what technology can do for the average person. And that's because in his own lived experience, he pulled himself out of poverty. He's found his way to this country, and he built a life for himself, and he eventually became pretty wealthy later on in his life. And actually, a lot of people in China think like him. They've seen their country lift hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. You can criticize the government for a lot of things, but that is an undeniable fact. And in a lot of ways, the Chinese population, at least before COVID, had the can-do spirit that was once associated more with Americans because of this. And the polling actually shows that the population over there has a much more optimistic view on all advancements in society, including generative AI. Whether that's wise or not, time can only tell, but I think this is important for Americans to understand, because we are very much a nation in decline in a lot of ways. And it's not because of technology, it's because how our political and corporate leaders use the technology and how they refuse or just are unable to spread the wealth equally across society, right? We have this structure right now. One high-paid worker is essentially employing a bunch of service gig economy workers. It's broken. In some ways, my father is right. There are benefits to the machine stamped world over the artisanal one. Like, if you're sick, do you want an artisanal pharmacist or Walgreens? Because they used to have these barefoot doctors killing people randomly with stupid ideas in China. I mean, there was no like ZocDoc database where you could look up how good doctors were. Every visit with a doctor was a lottery. In our mass-produced world, now you can just pick up a bottle of aspirin at CVS and not die. That's an improvement, right? It's a pretty extreme thing we don't think about as Americans, because all our lives we've lived in this prosperous and pretty safe environment compared to the rest of the world, right? It's all relative. I mean, there's a reason why the pre-war designed MG34 was made with machine steel parts, and the mid-war MG42 was made with machine stamped and pressed steel parts. Sometimes when you need more of something, you need to scale up something, you gotta cut corners. You gotta cheapen the process. Sometimes that process leads to a genocidal German machine gun. Sometimes it's an automobile, specifically the Ford Model T, which by 1925 was selling for just $260, about 2 months' wages for the average working man. I mean, that brought more progress and luxury to the masses than any fiscal policy or political movement that year. So those are kind of the two sides of this issue. And I think, as usual, finding balance is the solution to creating better outcomes for everyone. We have to probably automate a lot of more mundane and dangerous tasks that no one wants to do or no one honestly should be doing. And then we gotta help people find value again, because that is what this country has been missing in the last 20, 30 years. We've been on a decline. We have social, mental problems, especially affecting young men, who are the ones getting the most displaced. And if we don't address issues like this, if we don't focus on issues like this, then we're going to go into a spiral of nonsense, which is kind of what's happening right now, right? The culture wars, all of this crazy back and forth about the identity of what an American is. In my opinion, it's all just all noise created by political leaders who don't actually have real solutions to the problems we're facing. But anyway, guys, I hope I've left you guys with a lot of things to think about. I look forward to looking at your comments. Usually you guys have a lot of interesting insight that makes me think a lot. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.